Hey, good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, and this is the Jacob Hornberger Show. Welcome back. Nice to be with you all again. I want to talk to you tonight about the Ron Paul campaign, the Gary Johnson campaign, in the context of what's going on with respect to the status, of course, the people they're running against, the status media. We saw that Ron came out second in the Iowa straw poll, and what was the first thing that happened after that? Well, the news media, the mainstream news media, would mention that Ron came in second, and then, that was it for the entire rest of the article. It was about, Rick Perry or Rick Santorum or Kane or Romney or whomever. But, Bachman. But, never a mention again of the second place finish. And a person who actually came out, almost first. In fact, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Ron had come out first. I think they would have said, well, Ron Paul came out first, but let us talk about the unbelievable campaign and the results of Michelle Bachmann and Rick Santorum and so forth. I mean, those of you that read my blog on a regular basis know that I've been talking about this. But, if you haven't seen that video by Jon Stewart about this whole thing that's taking place in the mainstream media, you got to look at this thing. It is the most hilarious thing you've ever seen. I mean, what better weapon to deal with these statists than ridicule? And that's what Jon Stewart does. He uses ridicule to make fun of these people, make fun of the media. For this sort of blank out of Ron Paul's second place finish. So I want to talk about that tonight. I want to deal with it, superficially about what happened, but I want to delve deeper because this thing is a phenomenal occurrence. I've been in this movement since, I don't know, 23, 24 years, in terms of working in the libertarian think tank educational foundation business. I've been a libertarian since well, I guess since birth, but I mean, since when I discovered libertarianism was in the late 70s. I was in my late 20s. And one thing that I've noticed through all these years is this conscious or subconscious attempt on the part of the media, the statist political parties, to ostracize, to do everything they can to keep the libertarians out of the process. I mean, it's an amazing thing that goes on. I saw it in the Libertarian Party. The ballot access barriers, the ridiculous petitioning requirements, the campaign finance donations, that really fall most heavily on the third parties, the independents, the Libertarian Party. And just ignoring the party, ignoring the candidates, that we all know they've had these debates where, Libertarian Party goes out there and collects, thousands and thousands of signatures, and then the debate comes up and say, oh, well, we can't let you libertarians in. You're not in the polls high enough. You didn't raise enough money. And they always shift their criteria, and it's just enough to keep the libertarians out of the process. And, these are all the pro-democracy people, that support dropping bombs in Libya and Iraq and so forth for the sake of democracy. And over here, they do their best to keep out the libertarians. But what's happened over these years, the past several decades, is the libertarian movement just keeps growing despite that. I mean, they've ignored us, and they've acted like we didn't exist. They wish that we didn't exist. And yet our movement has been growing and growing and growing and growing to such an extent that it's now being manifested in the Ron Paul campaign. It got manifested 4 years ago. It's now manifesting itself again, and no telling where it's going to go. But this kind of reflects how this movement has been going, notwithstanding what they've done to us in terms of ostracizing, excluding us, and so forth. And see it in the Gary Johnson campaign too. I mean, here is a guy who's a two-term governor of a major state. Imagine 8 years in office, and he announces for president, and somehow or another they say, well, you just don't meet our criteria to come into these debates. Well, that's not what it's about at all. What it's about is that Johnson self-describes as a libertarian. He meets the libertarian criteria. He favors drug legalization, or at least marijuana, and it's clear to me that he would consider the rest of it. That's like the first step. He wants to bring the troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and he talks about libertarian principles. That's what gets him knocked out of the debates. It's not their little artificial criteria of, oh, well, he's not at 2% in the polls, he's not 3. Like, they've got Kane in there. Kane's never held office in his entire life. I mean, this guy's from the business community. He says, I'm going to run for president. And you know, people say, well, Johnson doesn't have a chance. Well, Kane doesn't have a chance either. I mean, of course, you don't know who has a chance. I mean, that's the thing about debates and political participation, is that you never know how people are going to respond to a certain message. But if anybody qualifies to be in a presidential debate running for the Republican Party nomination, it should be a guy that's been governor for 2 terms, 8 years in office. But you see, this was a governor that called for marijuana legalization, and that's just a no-no. They don't want libertarians in this process. The only reason they're letting Ron Paul into these debates is they know that they would just catch unmitigated flack from not only libertarians, but just about everybody, because it would be so obvious. But remember, 4 years ago, the way they're treating Johnson now, that's how they treated Ron Paul. Remember, they were trying to exclude him from the debates because, oh, he didn't meet enough numbers, or he hadn't raised enough money, or some nonsense like that, until finally public pressure was brought to bear and they finally had to let Paul into the debate. Now, it's not something they wanted to do, and it's certainly not something they want to do with respect to Gary Johnson. So I want to talk to you about tonight as to what's going on here. And the first thing that's going on is we got to go back to the kind of life that all of us have been born and raised in, okay? I mean, we've been born in a welfare state, in a society in which the primary role of government is twofold. One is to take care of people, okay? I mean, that's the primary role of the federal government. That's the welfare state. That's the paternalistic state. And then in domestic fields, also the drug war, that's part of that. The government's taking care of us, making sure that we're not ingesting the wrong substances and sending us to our room in the penitentiary when we, violate the rules and the regulations. And then in the domestic affairs, the idea is we've all been born and raised under the warfare state or the national security state, whatever you want to call it. It is a society in which the military plays a dominant role, and the paramilitary, the CIA, in terms of an empire overseas, hundreds of military bases all over the world, invasions, occupations, torture, assassinations, kangaroo tribunals, whatever, rendition, partnerships with dictatorships. Though this is the kind of system in which we've been raised. We've been raised under a welfare state. We've been raised under a warfare state. Now, most people have come to just accept that this is what America's all about, that this is the United States. This is what characterizes us as a nation. This is the statist mindset. When you look at all those candidates on that stage, with the exception of Ron Paul, those are the kind of people we're dealing with. The people that have been born and raised under a welfare state and a warfare state, and it's just a permanent feature of American life. This is something that will always be with us in their mindsets. It's just something that's here, and it's even worse than that, though. You see that. Oh, and by the way, the mainstream media, the people that are asking the questions of all the candidates, that's their mindset too. I mean, thank goodness for the internet, because before the internet, they were the gatekeepers in terms of what ideas and perspective people heard. The only way you could get in there is like an op-ed or an article or whatever. But they're the gatekeepers. They wouldn't let in non-statist type articles. And in their minds, all this is normal. You see that the welfare state is normal. That's the normality. The warfare state, that's normality. It's even worse than that. In their minds, this is freedom. I mean, that's what they've been inculcated with since the first grade in the government schools, the public schools, the government-approved schools, the licensed private schools. This is what they teach. This is the whole idea of government control over education. You live in a free enterprise country. You live in a free market country. You live in a free society, unlike those people in North Korea and Cuba and those kind of to Burma, Vietnam, those totalitarian socialist communist countries. Wow, thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free. And the troops are over there defending my freedom. You see, that's all the norm for a statist. That every one of those people asking those questions, that's their mindset. Every one of those candidates, except Ron Paul, that's their mindset. So, along comes a libertarian, and they're just totally befuddled by this. I mean, they're like, what? The libertarian is saying, I'm fighting for a free society. I mean, you hear right up there, I'm the only candidate talking about liberty. Well, in the mind of the statist, that's stupid, because everybody knows that we live in a free society. So why does somebody need to talk about liberty when we're already living a life of freedom? And that's what's going on in the minds of these statists. They just, it befuddles them when a libertarian comes along and says, we're fighting for a free market society. They say, well, wait a minute, what's he talking about? What a kook. We live in a free market society. Because in their minds, this statist paradigm, domestically and in foreign affairs, that's freedom. That's their whole life. This is the permanent feature. Now, there's another aspect to this, is that there's only a legitimate parameter of things that can be brought up within this paradigm. Okay? That is, the debate or the discussion can involve only certain things. And they've got to fit within the paradigm, within the statist paradigm. For example, you can talk about reforming welfare state programs. You can talk about, making them more efficient, getting rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse of them. But that's the extent of it. I mean, if you come in and you challenge the fundamental premises of the welfare state, which is what libertarians do, you're out of the ballpark. I mean, you're the kook, you're the fringe, because they're looking at there saying, what? He's challenging freedom? We live in a free society where the government takes care of us, and he's trying to take away our freedom? That's what's going on here. I mean, it's really in a sense a psychological problem. We libertarians are sort of like therapists. I mean, nobody likes to confront reality when they're living a life of delusion, when they're living a life of the lie, and that's what these people are living. I mean, look, if you go to Cuba, what do you find in Cuba? Okay, now we all know that Cuba is a communist country, right? We all know that it's a socialist country, right? Okay, it's built on the principles of socialism. Well, what do you find there? What does that mean? I've been to Cuba. But, you could apply the same thing to Vietnam, which we all know is a socialist communist country. China, socialist communist country. North Korea, socialist communist country. Even if you don't go there, we all know that they're socialist countries. But really, what does that mean? You see, you can see this in the mainstream press. They will talk about these countries being socialist, because the mainstream press is statist. But they never get into what that means. What is it about these countries that make them socialist? What is it about them that have socialist programs? Well, if you go to Cuba or Vietnam or whatever, guess what you're going to find? You're going to find Social Security. Now, isn't that amazing? Now, that's why the statists here never talk about that. They'll say, oh yeah, it's a socialist country, but they won't get into what it means. It's too uncomfortable, because it's a disconnect for them too. So not only do they not want people, they don't want libertarians saying this because they don't want other people to hear it, like their children. They don't want to hear it themselves because it makes them too uncomfortable. It's a disconnect. They say, wait a minute, how can Cuba have Social Security and Medicare and public schooling and subsidies and income taxation? And that's impossible, because Cuba's socialist and America's free enterprise. And so they their mind just starts going like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And it's like, they put the ears at la, 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 la. They don't want to hear it. And so that's why they keep these libertarians out of the political process. They keep them out of these debates and so forth, because libertarians don't debate and discuss within the statist paradigm. Now let me give you a perfect example of this. So this is really funny because, I was going to talk about this tonight, and the New York Times comes through for me today. I mean, this is, it is so unbelievable. This is an op-ed in the New York Times. Okay, it's called A Real Presidential Debate. Okay, now this is a real presidential debate. And the guy's name is Lance Morgan. He's a chief communication strategist for the public affairs firm Powell Tate. All right. No, wait a minute. Is this the Washington Post? I think this is the Washington Post, but it's the same difference. Okay, the same. This op-ed could easily appear in the New York Times, but it's Washington Post op-ed. All right. Now he wants a real presidential debate. Okay, he's tired of all this superficial stuff. That he wants to skip the theatrics and he wants people to get down to the real nitty-gritty. Okay, so he wants to give each candidate, 10 minutes to spew out what he believes on each of the major issues. What's his position? He doesn't want any nonsense, He wants them to really get down to brass tacks here. And so guess what he mentions as an example? Okay, Social Security, okay? Now, this is what he says. Simply mouthing support for Social Security, for instance, would be inadequate. Okay, you see? I mean, already you can get a hint of what's coming. That just because you say you're supporting Social Security, that's just not enough, I mean, but there's the implication. You got to be supporting Social Security. That, if you don't support Social Security, you're like outside the paradigm here, and you'll see what I mean when I say that. He says, a program designed when people retired at 65 and died at 67 has a problem in a society where millions more live decades longer. How to fix it? Let's have a genuine debate about whether to raise the retirement age and by how much. An argument about changing cost of living adjustments and how to do it. A discussion about whether future generations should have different options for retirement. That's it. I mean, that's the statist mindset right there in a nutshell. Let's have a real debate over Social Security. That's what he considers a real debate. And let me tell you something. All the statist commentators have been asking questions in these presidential debates, and they will continue asking the questions. They would be right there with him. They would say, yeah, that's a real debate. Let's debate whether the age for eligibility of Social Security should be 67 instead of 65, or should it be 69 or 71? Boy, that's a real debate. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. Because, along comes a libertarian and says, why do we have Social Security? Well, why do we need it? America lived without Social Security for more than 125 years. This came from the German socialists. I mean, that's why the Otto von Bismarck's bust is on the website of the Social Security Administration rather than the Founding Fathers, because the Founding Fathers would have never put up with this socialist nonsense. Oh my gosh! Oh, Jacob! Oh my God! You see? I mean, all of a sudden, I'm outside their little paradigm. I'm challenging the program itself, Mr. Morgan. I don't accept your premises that America has to be saddled forever with this little socialistic program that's bankrupting us and is the most anti-family value program in history. Tears family apart, makes people dependent on the government instead of their children. What kind of system is that? But you see, you're not supposed to talk like that because, this falls outside their little paradigm of statism. This is fringe. This is, oh my gosh, oh, you libertarians, you're not practical. We've got Social Security and it's been here for, umpteen years and it's here forever. Well, not necessarily. You know, it wasn't here for the first 120-something years until you statists got your program into play, and you beat the libertarians that had gone on for so many decades, and you got your little socialist paradigm in the 1930s, you know, your welfare state. But you see, that's what's going on in these debates and so forth, is that libertarians are challenging the premises of their system. You can see the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, you know, that it's only proper to discuss how Medicare should be reformed. How can we rein in these excess costs and so forth? But if you come out and say, this is a ridiculous program, it should never have been adopted, this is why government spending is soaring out of control, and it's destroying the healthcare arena. Doctors are leaving in droves if they're not getting prosecutors for violating some stupid Medicare regulation, which is partly why they're leaving in droves. Oh my gosh. Oh, you libertarians, where do you come from? Oh, don't you love freedom? Freedom is being taken care of by the government. We've been born and raised in a welfare state. It's freedom, it's freedom, it's freedom. By the way, in Cuba they say it's freedom too. They inculcate that in their mindsets in their public schools there because they got public schooling there. North Korea, I guarantee you, a lot of people in North Korea, I don't know how many, they honestly believe they're free because the government takes care of them with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth. In fact, these countries have really followed the statist principles to their logical conclusion. Because you know how the statists say, oh, we want to take from the rich, we want to take from the rich, tax the rich. You know, you see the New York Times arguing that, you see the Washington Post arguing that, you see these commentators during these debates saying, oh, well, why shouldn't we take from the rich? Why shouldn't we take from the rich? In Cuba, the government did that. They took from the rich. They took the businesses, they took the land holdings, they took the houses, they redistributed to the poor. Okay? I mean, they just did what statists here are doing slow motion. You know, we're slowly getting to bankruptcy. They did it all at once, and that's why they're bankrupt. That's why the Cuban money is worthless. Doesn't buy anything in the international markets. You know, everybody's got full employment. I mean, don't you see? Isn't that part of the statist paradigm too? You know, full employment. You know, growth. We got to get full employment back. In Cuba, they have full employment. Everybody works for the government. Okay, I mean, it's a guaranteed job. I mean, that's the logical consequence. As the public sector expands and expands and expands and expands, the private sector starts to crater. And gradually the government starts taking over more and more and more of the economy until it just absorbs it all like they did in Cuba and North Korea and so forth. But you see, you're not supposed to say that, because what you're supposed to say as a statist, and what these statist candidates say, is that it's not the welfare state that's failed here. You see, that's just the super no-no. You're never supposed to suggest that what has failed here is the welfare state and the warfare state. That's beyond the pale. That's like improper. That what you've got to do is to say, well, okay, this bureaucrat has failed. We got to get better people in public office. Yeah, okay, we've got some problems here. But if we can get better people in public office, that'll solve the problem. Or you can say, well, we've got to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse of these government programs. I mean, boy, if we can get the waste, fraud, and abuse, hey, hunky-dory, happy days are here again. Or you say, like the New York Times does, you know, every other day practically, oh, we got to just keep spending. You know, and I love it when they say, well, you know, long-term debt, yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem. There's the mounting debt that they got. But in the short term, we got to keep spending more money because that brings growth. You see, that stimulates the economy. And so, you know, all that's proper within the confines of the statist paradigm because it assumes the permanence of Social Security, Medicare, farm subsidies, foreign aid to dictatorships, aid to education, community grants, that all of this is just assumed, okay? It's a permanent feature in the statist mindset. Now, how can we make it work? Let's get together and let's make it work. Okay? Libertarians come along and say, no, we're challenging your system. It's your system that has caused our economic problems. It's your system that is costing us, you know, sound money. It's your system that is destroying us, that is impoverishing us, that is leading us toward bankruptcy, that is leading us to the omnipotent state, to the total socialist system in Cuba. Because the more economic crises there are, the more they cry for more government control. And you see, but that's beyond the pale for them. That's like, oh my gosh, no, we can't let libertarians in the political process saying those kind of things. People might listen to them. And they don't want to hear it. The statist who's living the life of the lie, the life of delusion, and that's what they're living, that this socialist system is, that these socialist programs are freedom, that they're free enterprise, that they go to the Chamber of Commerce every week for their meetings, and they don't want to hear what we libertarians have to say. That's why they knock them out of these debates. That's why they knock them out of the political process, because we're like therapists. You know, a lot of people, they go to a therapist and they drop out after, 3 or 4 sessions, because all of a sudden they realize, hey, this ain't no fun and games. This guy's making me confront reality, and I don't want to confront reality. I'm nice in my little life of delusion. And you see, that's why they would prefer that libertarians just shut up, or that we just remain silent, or that we remain excluded from the vehicles of communication, because they feel that as long as they can live in their little life of delusion, of the life of the lie, everything will be hunky-dory. But you see, any psychiatrist will tell you that's just nonsense. That just because, a guy's living a life of delusion and he believes the delusion doesn't mean he's not going to have consequences from the denial of the reality. He's going to have enormous consequences. But a lot of times, it's just too painful. A person doesn't want to confront reality. I mean, an example of this is that movie, The Truman Show. Great movie if you haven't seen it. Where Truman's down there, in this little bubble world, where he thinks it's real life, but it's all actors. He was born into this system, and so he doesn't know any better. He thinks, oh, well, all this is reality, and people out here in the outside world are watching him on reality TV. They're saying, wow, look, it's the most popular show, in the world. That, they're laughing at this guy, because he thinks this is reality. Now, if somebody came up to Truman and were to say, hey, this isn't reality, man. I mean, that's not really the sky up there, this isn't, these are actors and stuff. He'd say, bull, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this. Well, not in the movie. I mean, you could tell that he was trying to seek something better, trying to seek reality. But a lot of statists, they don't want to. They live in this little delusion that all of this system, this statism, this inculcation of statist values in the public government schools and the government-approved schools, Social Security, Medicare, subsidies, that all this is freedom. They just want to keep living that life, and we libertarians won't let them. We're up here saying, no, this was a wrong turn. This statism had nothing to do with freedom. It was an abandonment of freedom. It was a rejection of economic liberty, a way of life based on you keep everything you earn, no income tax. I mean, Americans live without income taxation for more than a century. No Social Security, no Medicare, no farm subsidies, no aid to dictatorships, no charity, no government charity, which really isn't charity, it's just welfare. It's coerced, mandatory welfare. That's not what they want to hear, these statists. But, you see, they're in a real quandary. They're in a real quandary, and Ron Paul's campaign is putting them in that quandary, and it's fantastic. That you see, they do their best to ignore the results. I mean, that's what all those articles about. That's what Jon Stewart was making fun of. Because they're afraid that if they give it too much play, people will start to look into it. And this is what's happened with the libertarian movement. I mean, these are exciting times for us libertarians. Why? Because so many people are starting to wake up and they're saying, I'm a libertarian. I don't believe in all this socialist junk. I don't believe in this big spending mentality. I don't believe in the destruction of a currency through irredeemable paper money. They're starting to realize what the founding principles of this country were. Sound money. Gold and silver coins was the coin of the realm. That's what people use as their official money because they didn't trust paper money. They knew that governments, the Federal Reserve, would do exactly what they're doing right now. Printing it up, getting the crank at the printing press. This is what the mainstream statist media is saying. Crank up that printing press again. Give us stimulus. Give us growth. They don't understand that real growth, substantial growth, long-term growth comes from the private accumulation of capital that is based on savings in a society. It can't be done through the artificial printing of money. All that does is distort things. I mean, it's intuitive. I mean, if you could make a country wealthy by just having the printing presses running by the central bank, why can't Cuba do that? I mean, they've been printing money since the time of the Castro Revolution, 1959. They're impoverished. They're on the depths of starvation. Same with North Korea. I mean, they say, oh, well, it's a famine. It's a famine. No, it isn't. It's their socialist system that encompasses a central bank and paper money. Of course, nobody's going to accept it. But if that was the key to wealth and prosperity, those countries would have had it a long time ago. But that's the statist mindset. The libertarians are saying, look, why not sound money? Ditch this central bank. Ditch the irredeemable paper money. Return to either a gold standard or preferably a free market in money. I mean, this is what Friedrich Hayek talked about, the Austrian libertarian Nobel Prize winning economist. The denationalization of money. If you haven't read that essay, I highly recommend it. He's where he says, look, separate money in the state. Let the market determine what the medium of exchange is. Maybe it'll be gold coins, maybe it'll be silver. I have a hunch it would be, because these are sound money. Government can't, go out and print a bunch of gold. And it protects people from what they're doing and what they've done for decades, this inflationary debasement of the currency. I mean, look at the system we live under. People can't save. Are you saving very much money? I mean, who's able to save these days? That's because of the plunder and the looting that's taking place with the income tax and the IRS and the Federal Reserve, the debasement of the currency. There was an editorial in the Washington Post today. It was two articles in the same paper. Gosh, taking Michelle Bachmann to task because she considers the IRS an enemy of her enemy and the enemy of America and freedom, and the Post editorial was, look, these are just regular people working here, and they're part of America, and we can talk about reforming the IRS and so forth, but who's going to say that they're our enemy? Well, hello. I mean, see what the mindset is, though? The IRS is a permanent feature of America. We were born and raised under the IRS, the income tax, the Federal Reserve, the welfare state, Social Security. And so let's all get along here. Well, along come the libertarians, and I don't know whether Bachmann's saying this or not. I know she's supposedly reading Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian school. If she is, then she ought to be calling for the abolition of the IRS and the income tax, because these are, notwithstanding what the Washington Post is saying, these are antithetical to a free society. They're the opposite of freedom. Why do you think Americans live without income taxation for more than a century? Because they saw it as the antithesis of a free society. A free society is where people are engaging in enterprise freely. Freely meaning free enterprise, meaning free of government control and regulation. They're entering into beneficial economic transactions with others. They're accumulating the fruits of their trades, their earnings. They're saving the large portion of their money because there's no income tax. They keep it. They don't have to send any part to the IRS because there's no IRS. And then through that massive accumulation of capital, through each family, all adding up, businesses are out there borrowing money to go out and build a better factory, buy a tractor, making workers more productive. The additional productivity it brings more revenues to the firm, real revenues, not just paper money revenues, which means higher wages for the workers because everybody's doing well. They're starting to bid workers away. Wages have to rise. Real wages. I mean, this is what was going on in America before the welfare state. Real wages in one 20-year period in the late 1800s doubled and then doubled again. Real wages, not just paper money wages. Imagine that. How would you like to get a doubling of your pay within a 20-year period in terms of real terms? But you see, again, are you getting a sense of how different libertarianism is? We're not involved with trying to save the welfare state. We're not involved with trying to reform it. We're here trying to get rid of this paradigm and replace it with an entirely new paradigm. That's what's scaring these people. It's scaring them so much that they don't want to hear it, because, change is difficult for a lot of people. They want government to take care of them. They see government as their daddy, as their God, and we're here saying, you don't need this. This is junk. This is heroin. This is bad news. It's talk about self-reliance and voluntary charity. Decide for yourself. What you're going to do with your money. You're going to help your parents out after they've brought you up or not. You're going to help the church out. You're going to spend your money. You're going to go on vacation. I mean, this is what we're talking about. A way of life based that nurtures self-responsibility, charity, compassion, where people are making choices. I mean, this is what genuine free will is all about, when you got this wide ambit of freedom. And that, of course, brings up the drug war. I mean, this is, again, the statists say, okay, the proper parameters for discussing the drug war, we know what they are. Okay, should there be same sentences for crack cocaine and regular cocaine, or should there be disparity of sentences? Should there be mandatory minimum sentences or not? Should the DEA be, helping the ATF send guns down into Mexico, or should it not? I mean, this is their legitimate ambit of debate within the drug war. I mean, every one of those statists on that presidential stage, I guarantee you, believes in the drug war. Every one of the commentators down there believes in the drug war, and you're going to see it more and more. They're not going to even ask questions about the drug war. I mean, they might once in a while or so. They don't want to talk about this because there's a libertarian up there. They don't want to have anybody challenge the premises of statism in the drug war. Okay? I mean, this thing's going on for 40 years. Death, destruction, how many, 40,000 people in Mexico killed in the 6-year crackdown there, where the military's now involved. Now the CIA's getting involved. Did you see that? And the U.S. military's getting involved. Retired officers the U.S. government's sending down to Mexico. Yeah, that's going to really help. Now, what happens with one of these guys, these CIA guys or military guys, goes and kills a bunch of drug cartel members, and their fellow members retaliate and blow up a federal building in El Paso or whatever? Then, oh man, all we're going to have oh my gosh, enemy combatant doctrine. The terrorists had merged with the drug dealers, and now we've got to use, all our infringements on civil liberties in the terrorism cases, now in the drug cases, and, military tribunals for drug users, and, enemy combatant doctrine, torture of drug dealers. This is idiocy. This is absolute idiocy, but not in the mind of the statist. It's all normal to him because he grew up in the drug war. He was born and raised. It was already here. When he came into this life, the drug war was already here. Okay? And so it's all normal for him. All this death and destruction, and the parameters of proper debate are, well, should we spend more money on the drug war? Should we spend less? Or should there be equal treatment? Yeah, it's just all nonsense. Should there be roving, police cars being able to stop people on the highways and look for drugs? And idiocy, total idiocy. There's only one real solution to this idiocy, and that's to end the prohibition, just like they did with booze. End the prohibition. Legalize it. It's over. It's done. You've killed enough people. You've destroyed enough people's lives with this war. Enough. Go home. Rest. Relax. They don't want to do that, and they don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear it. They just want to keep going on with their little statist paradigm, and this is why they keep off Gary Johnson. They know that Johnson's going to get up there and talk about at least legalizing marijuana and probably also legalizing drugs down the line. Ron Paul, they know he's going to talk about drug legalization. They don't want to bring it up. They don't want to hear it. They don't want other people to hear it. Because they see what's happening with Paul's campaign. They see the people gravitating toward libertarianism. They see that people are starting to wake up and say, the libertarians have been right the whole time. I mean, they've been right the whole time on the drug war, on out-of-control spending, on sound money, the Federal Reserve. Isn't it funny to see Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich jumping on the Federal Reserve bandwagon? I mean, these guys are like weather vanes, where they check out how the wind's blowing, and then they jump on that. Now, hey, I'm not complaining, but it is kind of humorous. I mean, I'd like them to go all the way and say, let's restore sound money in this country and get rid of the central bank So far, they're talking about auditing it, but hey, I'll take anything I can get from these statists. You know, that's fine with me. Out of control spending. I mean, we know that there's parameters of legitimate debate there. That all you can talk about is how the rate of increase of spending is going to be reduced. I mean, that's what's within legitimate parameters of debate. Should government spending go up 2%? Should it go up 4%, 6%? But if you even suggest, hey, go up 0, I mean, just freeze it. Don't keep adding more debt. Oh man, you're a kook. I mean, you're like from outer space. What planet did you come from? Heaven forbid you start saying, let's reduce government spending by, let's say, 25% across the board. You know, so because we've got this other debt ceiling now coming up. You know, 2 years from now, it's coming up. Do you see them saying, hey, you know, they let us off the hook this time, but hey, we got to really start slashing spending here. I mean, like real spending, like going from 25% below what they're already spending. You know, starting to pay off the debt. No. They're talking about whether the spending should go up 2%, 4%, 6% over the next 2 years, which means when the debt ceiling comes up again, we're going to go through this again where they're going to say, oh, catastrophe, catastrophe. And when we libertarians say, well, wait a minute, we've been telling you this for the last 2 years, that you've got a debt ceiling coming up. You need to start not just raising spending only 2% and 4%. You need to cut it like 25% across the board. They're going to say, oh, is that what you libertarians were saying? Gosh, if only we had let you in the debates, if only we had listened to you and, you know, published your op-eds and stuff. Oh, gosh, woe is us. Well, I guess we got to lift the debt ceiling and let, you know, whoever the president is at that time borrow another $3 trillion and mount more debt on the backs of the American people. You know, the best thing to do is start abolishing departments and agencies. I mean, even Ronald Reagan, you know, talked about abolishing the Department of Education, I think the Department of Commerce, if I'm not mistaken. But there's all kind of departments that can be abolished, you know. Abolish the DEA, abolish the ATF, abolish, you know, the Federal Trade Commission, you know, whatever. Abolish foreign aid to dictatorships. Oh, okay, that gets us into foreign policy. You know, here again, I mean, this is what was fascinating. Seeing that debate exchange between Santorum and Ron Paul. I mean, it says it all. It says it all. That Santorum says, you know, oh, it all started in 1979. Iran's our enemy. Man, it's really our enemy because it took those diplomats hostage. It attacked the United States. Well, if Ron Paul had not been on that stage, that would have been the end of it. All the other little statists there with him would have just nodded their heads and said, yeah, he's right. Yeah, he's right. Yeah, it started in 1979. It took Ron to speak the truth because he's a libertarian. So a libertarian's able to say, when the federal government's in the wrong, it's in the wrong. And a libertarian is not afraid to say that. A statist is desperately fearful of pointing out that the federal government's in the wrong. Why? Because it's like a child, you know, questioning his parents. You know, the federal government's their God for these statists. It's their parent, it's their daddy. It provides their allowance, their retirement, their education. It's their everything. And so they may throw tantrums and say, oh, military spending, they just spent $1,000 for that pair of pliers. That's outrageous. Oh, my God. But they're not going to challenge the paradigm of the warfare state, the empire, the bases all over the world, the U.S. military as the world's policeman. They're not going to challenge this imperial role that's also bankrupting America and that is, you know, killing people on a weekly basis. And that, you know, this is as I've said before, this is the greatest terrorist producing machine in history. Every time they kill somebody in Afghanistan or Iraq, you got 10 more people that are now anger and rage, full of rage and everything, ready to do harm to the United States. And then this perpetual threat of terrorism they use to take away our freedoms here at home. You know, the fondling at the airports, the Patriot Act, the gun control, the enemy combatant doctrine, the torture, the assassination of Americans. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. They use that as the excuse to take away our freedoms. Well, it's all rooted there in that U.S. foreign policy, but you'd never know that from talking to a statist because he was born and raised under the national security state, the Cold War state. the big government state, you know, the military empire. He's not going to challenge that. He's not going to question it. He's not going to say, my government's responsible. Hey, you must hate America. You must hate America, you know. And because in their mind, the federal government is America. They don't think in terms of the private sector and the government sector. To them, it's all one and the same thing. And so they get befuddled when you point out that the Constitution, by its own terms, protects the private sector from the federal sector. They don't understand that. It's just befuddling. So here's Ron saying, look, the reason they were so angry in 1979, the Iranian people, was because the CIA, which is, of course, a branch of the U.S. government, it's a major branch. We may not call it a branch, it's an agency, but it's really a branch. It went into Iran and it ousted the democratically elected prime minister of Iran in a secret, surreptitious coup. I mean, imagine if you learned today that that Iran had come over here and assassinated John Kennedy in order to get Lyndon Johnson into power. Would you not be a little bit upset over that? I mean, sure, people could say, hey, that's ancient history. That was 50 years ago. Don't get over it. I don't think so. I think people would be very, very angry over that. The CIA goes, okay, they didn't kill Mossadegh, but they got him out of power. He had been Democratic elected, Time Magazine's Man of the Year. He was highly esteemed in Iran. They go in there and they install the Shah of Iran because that was their boy. You see, Mossadegh had nationalized British oil. British oil had gotten mad about it. And I'm not saying nationalization of oil is good. It's actually bad. Just like, you know, Franklin Roosevelt's nationalization of gold. Nationalization is not a good thing. But it's their country, you see. And so the CIA goes and says, well, we got to help the British out, you know, with their oil concessions. So they go in there and they install one of the most brutal dictators in history, the Shah of Iran. He tortures people. He suppresses dissent within his country. He incarcerates people. He executes people. He's got one of the scariest domestic intelligence agencies in history, the SAVAK. It was trained by the CIA. It was supported by the CIA. That was a terrifying thing to live under for 25 years. The Iranian people were furious when they learned that this dictator had been installed by the CIA. 25 years of brutal dictatorship. And they succeed in having a revolution. And they oust this guy from power, and U.S. officials are furious about it. This is their dictator. This is their buddy, the Shah. This is the guy they installed. Well, the Iranian people are angry. Now, what they did was they put these diplomats and they took them hostage. Nobody's going to defend that. But what we're trying to do is get people to understand it. See, that's what all too many Americans don't want to do. And it's this denial of reality again. Is don't try to understand what the foreigners are feeling here. Libertarians are saying it's time to do that. It's time to understand. When Ron was saying that, you know, why does Iran try to get a nuclear weapon? Hello? You got the U.S. on both sides, Iraq and Afghanistan, the military on both sides, the CIA, calling this country an axis of evil, and being the foremost regime change operation in the world. I mean, everybody understands that the U.S. is about regime change. It ousts dictatorships it doesn't like in Libya. It was never about protecting the civilians. That's just lies and delusions. It's about getting rid of a dictator that's not part of the U.S. empire. That's what's going on in Syria today. Now, do you see them talking about the military dictatorship in Egypt? I mean, the military plays the same type of dominant role in that society as the military does here. And the military's already told the country that whatever government you put together, whatever kind of society you put together here with your constitution and your pretty little government, always understand that the military is going to be here. That's the status quo. They take the same attitude as the statists here do on the welfare warfare state. That the military's permanent feature, deal with it, now go ahead and do whatever you need to do. The U.S. is still supporting it, flooding in foreign aid. It wasn't just about Mubarak. It's about dictatorships that they're partners with, that will torture on their behalf. Bahrain, do you see any objections that Obama has to the dictatorship in Bahrain? Of course not. That's where the military base is. They would love to establish military bases in Libya. They would love to establish military bases in Syria. They would love to have their dictatorships in there. That's not what freedom's all about. And you see, this is what Ron was saying, is that here's Iran, they got, Pakistan's got nuclear weapons, India's got nuclear weapons, the United States is on both sides surrounding, Iran and threatening, with regime change operations and so forth, which of course they did in Iraq. It was never about WMDs. It was getting rid of a dictatorship that was no longer playing ball. Now, they had played ball with Iraq, with Saddam Hussein in the 80s. He was a good guy back then, a good dictator. They turned on him, and so Iran looks at this and says, hey, when are you coming and doing it here? And Israel's got nuclear weapons. Does it surprise anybody? If you were an Iranian, would you not sit there and say, hey, maybe this is a way to prevent all this stuff? Because once North Korea got nuclear weapons, you don't see the U.S. talking about regime change there anymore. And the point also is that, what libertarians want to do is get rid of this empire, this military empire, and establish harmonious relationships with the people of the world. There's no reason why we have to be enemies of the Iranian people. Have you ever met Iranian people? They're the nicest people you'd ever meet. These are people just like ordinary people like you and me. A lot of them love Americans. Look at Vietnam. It's a communist regime. They killed, 58,000 American men, in the Vietnam War when the U.S. was intervening over there, when this stupid, idiotic, senseless, imperialistic war. And they kicked the U.S. out of the country ignominiously. Today, it's still a communist regime, and yet people get along. Americans go over there, travel and trade. I'm the last one to support a communist regime. I'm a libertarian. I oppose communism. I oppose socialism. But you can peacefully coexist with these totalitarian regimes. Take Cuba. The embargo there is idiocy. Do you see any of this being discussed and debated on these presidential debates? Ron brought it up. Why do we have this idiotic, stupid, destructive 50-year embargo against Cuba? It's because the statists are obsessed. They're obsessed with regime change in Cuba. They still haven't gotten over that the invasion didn't get the regime change affected. The assassination attempts, the terrorist attacks inside Cuba, none of that accomplished it, and they've never forgotten. They've had this obsession with Cuba, and so they've got this idiotic embargo. Did you see any of those commentators follow up on that and say, hey, where do you guys stand on this embargo? No, because Ron Paul had gone outside the proper parameters of debate. You're not supposed to question the embargo against Cuba. You're supposed to talk about whether we should let Americans send a little bit more money there, whether tourist groups should be able to get licenses to go over there on an increased basis. Those are the proper parameters of debate. But you don't go in there and just challenge the whole embargo. What would our daddy think? See, and this is why they keep the libertarians out of the process. We are challenging their paradigm. We're telling them this ain't freedom. This is nonsense. This is statist nonsense, the same kind of nonsense that exists in Vietnam and Cuba and so forth. Look at Syria. Okay, they just established sanctions on Syria. Hello. Does the CIA have to comply with these sanctions? Notice they don't say anything about that, because it's the CIA. Everybody's scared to death of the CIA. You bring a case against some kidnapping or torture at the hands of the CIA in federal court, and all they got to do is just walk in there and say, "State secrets, Your Honor, CIA." And man, that federal judge, he gets more terrified than the members of Congress do. Look. The CIA has total power. It is a total totalitarian type entity within the U.S. government. It can go and kidnap anybody at once and send them away to torture. There's nothing that's going to happen to the CIA. If the torture victim or the execution victim is his family sues, the courts are going to throw it out immediately. As soon as the CIA says, state secret doctrine, state secret doctrine. And by the way, the state secrets doctrine wasn't even passed by Congress. It was judicially created by the Supreme Court. In a case where the government, now as it turns out, was defrauding the Supreme Court, lying to them that there was no state secrets at all. They were hiding illegal, nefarious conduct on the part of the government. the Supreme Court bought it, said, oh, we got to trust the government. We got to defer to authority here. State secrets. And even though they've now learned that they got defrauded, they haven't rescinded this judicially created doctrine. And so the CIA can do anything it wants. Now, it went in and kidnapped people in Italy. The agents got convicted there, but, you know, nothing happens to them. That nobody's going to extradite them. Nobody's investigating it. No member of Congress is going to investigate the CIA. You think they're stupid? The CIA was down there in Argentina killing an American. They participated in the killing of an American during that U.S.-supported coup down there. You know, where they ousted the democratically elected president of Chile, and they installed a brutal military dictatorship. But to them, this was order and stability. And have you seen any investigation? Has Congress subpoenaed the CIA to bring us records? Who were the agents that participated in that killing? No. This is the CIA. Well, okay, so they've imposed sanctions on Syria, but what about the CIA? There's no mention. It was the CIA that entered into a partnership with this same dictatorship in Syria to torture a guy that they kidnapped on American soil and sent to Syria. I mean, imagine. They didn't, you know, take him to a federal judge. They felt he was a terrorist, but they didn't charge him with any terrorism. They didn't bring a warrant. They didn't convene a grand jury. They didn't bring him before a federal judge. They took him and cut a deal with their counterparts in the Syrian CIA. We don't know the details because who's going to ask? You know, did President Bush know about this? Did the CIA do it without his authority? Did they kill that guy in Chile with the consent of the president? We don't know. Because the guy brings a lawsuit here in the United States. He got tortured for a year. Tortured for a year in Syria. This dictatorship, same dictatorship that they're now complaining about. The CIA, the U.S. government, because the CIA is part of the U.S. government, entered into this partnership with his dictatorship. Oh, they're complaining today, but, you know, that's just because they've turned on him. You know, why can't the CIA, how do we know the CIA is not going to use this dictatorship again? You know, this is the type of thing that shouldn't be going on in this country. This is why we need libertarians out here, because libertarians are the only ones that can save this country. You know, the statists have sent this country into the ground. They're sending us into bankruptcy. They're sending us into moral debauchery. They're sending us, you know, into the dark world, the dark side. The only hope for this out is the libertarian philosophy. You know, where we dismantle the empire, bring all the troops home, discharge them, dismantle the military-industrial complex. Cold War's over. Get rid of them. They're the root cause of the terrorist threat. Once you uproot this root cause, now all of a sudden you're returning to prosperity and harmony, sound money, people accumulating wealth, interacting with the people of the world, including the people of Cuba and the people of Iran, the people of North Korea, people interacting with Americans all over the world. People love Americans, except those that conflate them with the U.S. government and what the government's doing. We've got to do, they call it isolationism, they got it backwards. They're trying to isolate the private sector, okay, with their Berlin Wall down the southern border, their immigration controls, their trade restrictions, and unleash the federal government onto the world with bombs and missiles and all this stuff. It's got to be the other way. This is what our founding fathers told us, that rein in the federal government, isolate it, diminish it, weaken it, and then liberate the private sector, liberate the American people. Both domestically from this oppression here, and then but liberate them to interact with the people of the world. This is the future of our country. This is libertarianism. This is why people are waking up and coming to our cause. It's very exciting. The statists are doing their best to ignore us, ostracize us, marginalize us. It ain't working. This movement is growing and growing and growing. And when it reaches a critical mass, whatever that critical mass is, which may be significantly less than 50%, you're going to see some very, very exciting changes, perhaps even as suddenly as the fall of that other statist monument, the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Good night.